Good afternoon and welcome to another session of the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi. Today we'll be taking up two topics for detailed analysis. The first is evolving India-US relations, particularly in the context of proposed recent hike in the H-1B visa fee and its implications for the bilateral ties. The second topic is labor welfare and industrial relations with a focus on key issues and developments in this domain. Following this, we will be taking up mains value addition on youth unemployment, with data that has featured in the Indian Express and the Hindu. Finally, under our prelims pointers, we'll cover Vaishya, Tekri, Mound, the NCDC Act, UPI and ISRO. So let us begin with the first topic for the day, which is the evolving India-US relations, especially in the context of the recent proposed hike in the visa fee that has been applied on these applications by the foreign nationals. This fee is applied by the US government. The argument or the rationale which is being given by the US government is that when the American companies, what they're doing is they're prioritizing foreign nationals because they provide cheap labor and they are ignoring the people, the skilled people in America. That is why it is leading to negative impacts on the American workforce. And therefore, they have proposed this hike. You must remember that this is still in the proposal stage. This has not been implemented yet. So what we must remember is that this is the fee that has been proposed to be implied. It is in the legal procedural stage, not yet fully functional. Another thing we must remember is the potential impact that it can have on the professional workforce or the people that people of the Indian diaspora who are right now working or studying in the American universities, working in the US companies. So what is going to be the impact? So India is since India has a comparative advantage when it comes to the skilled workforce, especially in the information technology realm, therefore, that sector is going to be impacted deeply. Now, there is a growing debate over the skilled migration. The debate essentially centers around this idea only, whether to prioritize the local national workforce or to give an open platform, open field to all the workers globally. Now, why is USA so important for India? That is the next question that arises in mind in the light of this development. Yes, this is in news, but how is our relationship right now evolving when it comes to USA? First importance that USA holds in the foreign policy of India is in the economic realm. So, India is one of the major trading partners. So, when it comes to the investment relationships or the trading relationships that India has with foreign nations, one amongst the topmost always is the United States of America. So, this is the economy angle. So, what happens is this trade is not merely happening when it comes to goods, but it is also happening when it comes to services, when it comes to technology, or when it comes to cooperation across different sectors. For example, agriculture, for example, defense sector, and so on and so forth. The second is the tech realm. So both of these nations, since USA is highly advanced when it comes to critical technologies, especially technologies involving biotech, involving, say, advanced manufacturing, quantum computing, cloud computing. In all of those technologies, both the nations, they are right now focusing a lot upon and thereby also collaborating. The next thing is defense partnership. So we've always had a very good relationship. I would not say preceding 1990s, but after that we have had a significant partnership when it comes to the defense realm also with the USA. Next comes the Indo-Pacific convergence. Now this is talking largely about the strategic aspect of the relationship, wherein both the nations, they have a similar vision when it comes to the Indo-Pacific arena. So, both of the nations, they have a common apprehension, which is China, and the growing impact or the growing influence of China when it comes to economy, when it comes to the communication or the connectivity projects that China is right now implementing, the political leadership, it is taking so much of interest, and the kind of aggressive diplomacy which China is engaged in. This is giving both the nations a common platform to collaborate upon. Now, what is the vision that we share with USA? We share a vision of a free, open, inclusive and a rules-based Indo-Pacific order. So both the nations, they have democratic values. We rely more on soft power than on hard power. That is not the case with China. That is why this entire issue is giving both the nations a common ground to work together. So that is why this convergence comes into picture when it is especially talking about the Indo-Pacific arena. Next is the education and the human capital. So when we talk about the human capital or the cooperation between two nations in the education sector, so we have a lot of professionals, we have a lot of researchers, a lot of academicians who are right now in USA. So the global students that USA has, a significant proportion amongst them is contributed by India, and that is why it is not only India that is dependent on USA, but it is also the other way around. The next is Indian diaspora. So Indian diaspora is having not only economic implications or repercussions, but having a diaspora also means that we are having a political presence there. We are also having a cultural presence there. All of this leads to high amount of good ties when it comes to people relations. And that is why USA is important, not just from the economic angle, but from various angles, which include defense, which include people-to-people ties, diaspora, soft power, the strategic convergences we have, and the apprehensions against China. Now, let us come to the next thing, which is the evolution of India-US relations. So how has this relationship evolved? Have we always been a very good friend of USA? The answer is no. Rather, when it comes to the Cold War era, India decided to follow the policy of non-alignment, wherein it was neither a part of the bloc which was created by the USSR nor a part of the bloc created by the Western world. So we decided that we need to maintain our autonomy. Now this was a period of estrangement because India was having very close ties to Russia, and at that time USA was rather cooperating on a strategic level with Pakistan, and that included the security aspect of their relationship as well. Now that is why this entire the geopolitical tensions at that time, there was a period of estrangement. Then came the 1991 when the USSR it broke down. Afterwards, India also opened its economy. Now Indian economy was rising at that time. Now when our economy is rising, when we are also gaining strategic importance in the world order, then USA took interest in the Indian, in cooperating more with India. That is when this entire geopolitical scenario, it changed, wherein the earlier kind of binaries that had formed, they kind of broke down, and now it was a phase of collaboration and cooperation that kind of intensified. At that time also, largely we can say that the relationship was more transactional than any strategic convergence as such. It kind of changed when it came to the 2005 civil nuclear deal. Before this, India was conducting its nuclear program independently, and it was not part of the, it is still not part of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty infrastructure that has been built by the Western world. Despite of that, the collaboration or the cooperation which USA did with India when it came to the civil nuclear realm, it kind of realized that India is no longer an outlier when it comes to the geopolitical global order. Rather, India is an active player. Therefore, India now began to be seen as a responsible actor or as a responsible player in the global order of things. Next comes the Indo-Pacific convergence after the strategic partnership evolved. Now, once this kind of relationship established when it came to the nuclear arena, thereafter India and USA, they evolved a strategic partnership, which today is rather a comprehensive global strategic partnership that we share with USA. Now we've seen the evolution towards the strategic partnership between both these nations. Afterwards, what started happening was China started growing militarily, it started growing economically, and also started gaining political importance around the world. As a result, the USA, which holds the global leader position since the end of the Cold War, it became more apprehensive of the Chinese goals, because China, as we all know, it is not a democracy. It is not a government or a state which focuses more on rules-based order or the peaceful coexistence along with the world community. Thereby, both the nations, they had now an arena wherein both these nations were collaborating and cooperating, which became the Indo-Pacific. Now came the initiatives such as Quad, wherein along with the other actors like Australia and Japan, both these nations were also collaborating bilaterally with each other when it comes to different goals. For example, ensuring that we have free and open sea lanes of communication, that we also have open supply chains, resilience of the supply chains. We wanted to ensure that both the nations, they also want to reduce their dependence on fixated or unilateral supply chains. And that is why it became a common concern to kind of protect the existing global order. Then comes the present phase. So is all hunky-dory in the present phase? The answer is again no. We have strategic convergences, which means we are collaborating right now on a lot of frontiers. The areas of cooperation we will be seeing in further slides, but we also have some transactional frictions that also we will be seeing. Now, what are the key facets of the multidimensional partnership that we share with America? First is the economic partnership, wherein we share a large amount of bilateral trade, and we also have a target to increase that bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. So this is the target regarding the bilateral trade. We are collaborating on major sectors, for example, the IT sector, the services, the manufacturing, agri, energy, pharma. So all of these we are right now collaborating upon. Both the nations in the energy sector, they want to focus more upon the renewable energy and try to reduce dependence on the supply of the crude oil, which can be limited by certain actors. When it comes to the FDI inflows to India, then US is amongst the topmost investors in the Indian market. So that is where we are seeing large amount of cooperation when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to clean energy, when it comes to infrastructure of India. Then comes the defense and security cooperation. Now what is happening in the defense realm is we are having joint military exercises. So the relationship is not only related to the import of the defense equipments that India has been doing from America. Rather, now is the time when we are trying to shift to co-development, co-regulation, focusing more on interoperability, the logistics cooperation, because we right now want to develop what we call as a deterrence capacity. So this is now involving a lot of things. So this not only involves the military cooperation only for the sake of say hard military powers, but also for things like humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, which both the nations provide in the Indo-Pacific region, especially when it comes to the small island developing states, the freedom of navigation, the things like counter-terrorism, maritime security, so on and so forth. Now we also have certain foundational agreements with USA, which is LEMOA, COMCASA and the BECA. The topmost amongst them also we have signed with the USA. Then comes the tech partnership as such. When we are talking about tech partnership, the initiatives like the initiative on the critical and emerging technologies, they come into picture, wherein we are collaborating when it comes to the advanced computing technologies, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, biotechnology, advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, clean energy, and all of these areas. Next comes the space cooperation that we also will be seeing. Next comes the skilling, R&D, partnership, innovation, the startup collaboration, the collaboration when it comes to cyber security, digital infrastructure. all of these are the areas that are still evolving and developing. Therefore, both the nations, they are learning from each other, they are developing those kind of technologies by collaborating with each other. Next, and the most important amongst them, are the people to people ties. So we have a strong diaspora, we have so many students studying in the USA, we have professional linkages, that is why we are discussing this issue so much in detail. We have cultural ties which are very vibrant. So all of these festivals you've seen across social media, they are right now being celebrated across the world, including the United States of America. Then when it comes to initiatives, for example, the heritage cooperation, we are focusing upon that. When it comes to this practicing yoga, it is also something that is evolving. There is a rising interest in all of these things that we are having. Next, coming to the other areas of cooperation, for example, the space cooperation. So we have different initiatives in that frontier. When it comes to climate, we discussed that we are focusing more on renewable energy. When it comes to energy security, reducing our dependence on the crude oil. When it comes to environment, focusing more upon the global net zero targets. Coming to the health and biotech sectors, we have been collaborating when it comes to the vaccine exports by India to the USA, and also the active pharmaceutical ingredients that we have been importing. Other areas also wherein we are more advanced when it comes to providing the healthcare facilities at an affordable prices, and USA is more advanced when it comes to the tertiary and the advanced medical facilities. Next, coming to the disaster resilience and the HADR operations across the Indo-Pacific area that we just now discussed. The agriculture and the food security also is something. See, we are having an agri-trade, though there are certain issues when it comes to the agri-trade we have, because USA always believes that we have more kind of tariffs and protections in place. Indian market is not as open as USA would like it. That is another issue. Then the education, the research and skilling cooperation we have right now, the connectivity and the infrastructure projects. For example, the Indo-Pacific connectivity, for example, the ITU2, the quality infrastructure, the maritime links and the resilient supply chains. Coming to the global governance and multilateral cooperation, so there are different global multilateral platforms on which both of these nations, they share common goals. For example, the United Nations, the G20, the WHO, WTO, or in general collaborating in many lateral platforms like the Quad that we just now discussed. So both of these nations, they basically want a democratic and a rules-based global order. That is why there is a fundamental kind of strategic compliance or convergence when it comes to the basic interests of both these nations. What are the major friction points? The first one that we have just now discussed are the restrictions in place which are being put upon the professionals whom the USA is trying to restrict. The second is the tariff and the trade barrier issues, because USA, it finds the Indian tariffs very high. It finds that the market access that US companies or the US manufacturers have when it comes to India, that is very low, and therefore it wants more openness when it comes to the bilateral trade. Despite these kind of conflict points or the friction points that we have still in talk, we are still in talk with USA when it comes to the bilateral trade agreement. In 2026, an interim bilateral trade agreement kind of was announced, and the talks for an advanced and a final agreement are still in the way. The market access issue we've discussed, the agriculture related things. See, when it comes to agriculture and the commodities related to agriculture, there is a fundamental difference. So when USA is thinking upon this, when it is discussing this issue with India, it is taking it more from an economic perspective or a trade related perspective. But when it comes to India, then there is also the issue of farmers' livelihood protection. There is also issue of food security. There is also issue of vulnerable sections which are dependent upon the support that we are providing them. Therefore, the fundamental divergence we have regarding the understanding and the positioning as such of the two sectors in the two nations, that is totally different, and that is why this is an issue. Then comes the digital taxation issue, wherein India believes that the global giant companies which are earning a lot from the developing world like India, they should be contributing to the taxation structure, and that is why this again becomes a conflict. Next comes the immigration, which we all know, which is being restricted to a great extent by the policies in the recent years by the USA. Next is the strategic autonomy. So when it comes to the relationships that India has with other nations, then it always wants to command its own position, it always wants to protect its own stand, and thereby the strategic autonomy. Now, USA is more often than not, it is accused of trying to mold Indian policies when it comes to the other nations, whether it is regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict or whether it is regarding Iran. So what happens is, with Russia, we have a historical relationship. We have our relationship in defense, we have a relationship in energy sector, and sometimes also on strategic aspects. That is where this kind of becomes conflicting, because the USA, aligning more with the Western world, and Ukraine as such, wants Indian dependence on the Russia, or Indian interaction with Russia, to reduce substantially. Coming to the Iran related issues, we know the sanctions that USA has been placing on Iran. And India has its own interests or its own relationship with Iran when it comes to the energy security aspect, when it comes to the connectivity projects, when it comes to having port like Chabahar. We also have our own interests in West Asia, and we are seeing Iran as a gateway to the West Asia as such. Therefore, this is more of a strategic kind of divergence that we have with USA. Then the US pressure on the India's defense or energy choices. So essentially, when it comes to the perspective on these evolving kind of infrastructure in the defense sector, in the technology sector, there is again a divergence. So USA sees India as a market, whereas India wants the collaboration in a way wherein we are also learning the R&D that is happening. We are also importing the technologies by which we can become self-empowered. So we are seeing it more from the perspective of co-development that we want to do with the USA, and this is where the essential divergence comes into picture. Now, what is the way forward? So essentially, we have to move from this transactional bargaining to more of institutionalized strategic partnership. So we all know that when it comes to having good relations with a major power, small issues or specific issues, they are not so important. Rather, the larger national interests as such are more of consideration, and we don't allow those kind of considerations, those smaller issues, to kind of grow or to dominate our relationship. That is why we should focus more on institutionalizing our partnership that we are already doing. For example, we are having the 2+2 dialogue with USA. We need to also protect the skilled mobility that we have, then expanding the tech co-development, then diversifying the economic relationship, not focusing upon certain sectors, rather diversifying the export basket and the import basket as well. Then strengthening our defense and the industrial cooperation, managing differences without allowing them to contaminate the strategic convergence, and preserving India's strategic autonomy. All of these are our goals and our way forward to the relationship. Now, this is one mains practice question that after listening to the discussion, you can easily answer this question. Try to organize the information in more systematic way. You will also learn how to mold the information that we already have when it comes to any mains topic to form an answer to a specific question. And that is essentially the skill that is tested to a great extent when it comes to the mains examination. Now, coming to the next topic that we have for today regarding the redefining of the term industry by the Supreme Court. So there has been a constitution bench, a 9-judge constitution bench, which has focused more on the scope of the term industry. So firstly, we need to see the history. So earlier there was the Industrial Disputes Act, under which the term industry was there. Then there came a case in 1978, the Bangalore Water Supply Jurisprudence, under which judiciary or the Supreme Court defined the term industry. So it gave a principle. The triple test was the name given to that kind of principle. What was it? That if there is any kind of systemic activity that is taking place which is involving a formal relationship between the employer and the employee, and ultimately there is also production or supply of any kinds of goods, or there is supply of any kinds of services, in that case this will be called as industry. Now there was certain issue with this, that was of what about the activities which are conducted by the state agencies. So there are certain sovereign activities, for example, providing the defense, providing the justice, legislation. All of these are state activities or sovereign activities provided by certain institutions. Then there are also other kind of institutions, for example, the charitable institutions. Then also other kind of services, for example, the health, for example, the education facilities. Where do you include all of these? If you are following this definition, then you will be including all of these into the term industry. But is there no difference between the activities which, say, state is providing, between the sovereign activities and the commercial activities? How do you draw the fine line? That was something that was missing in this triple test. This triple test had clearly stated that profit is not going to be the judgmental criteria, which means that if any organization is not for profit, it is not earning profit, even then it can fall under the term industry. This was brought in specifically because there could be businesses saying that we are not industry, and thereby they would try to escape these provisions, because these provisions they are providing for worker safety, worker regulations which are very strict in nature. But at the same time it was very expansionist, so it was very broad, a definition which was bringing in different areas that were not supposed to be there under the definition of the term industry. Thereby came the Industrial Relations Code of 2020, wherein the basic principle still remains the same, that there has to be a systematic activity, there has to be a relationship between the employer and an employee who are collaborating with each other in order to produce goods or services. But now another provision was brought in which was to specifically exclude certain kind of activities like the charitable or philanthropic institutions, like the domestic services, the sovereign functions of government, or any other notified activity as such. Now this is something which was very important to be brought in. Let us see the jurisprudence which has been there in this regard and also the constitutional foundation. Firstly, you would want to know that why do we want to regulate this sector? Because when we are talking about the relationship between an employer and an employee, this is essentially a free contract that they are entering into. So why does state need to intervene? Now this intervention draws from the idea because we are a welfare state. We want to ensure social justice to the vulnerable sections of our society. That is why the Constitution has laid certain provisions under which this relationship is also being regulated, because by the sheer nature that the employer is going to be in an economically more powerful position and the worker is going to be dependent upon the employer for his basic sustenance also. So the relationship is not going to be on an equal footing. There is going to be over dependence by one party on the other, which can lead to exploitation or can lead to misuse of the powerful position that the employer holds. Now that is why Article 21, it talks about dignity, and under that dignity we also include the working space, we also include certain other provisions. Article 23 talks about forced labor. Then 39 talks about livelihood and equal pay, and it also provides for the involvement of state or state intervention to ensure that there is kind of healthy working environment for the workers. Then 41 talks about the right to work of people given that the economic condition of the state is providing for that. Then Article 42 talks about the humane working conditions of workers in their respective areas. 43 talks about a living wage or tries to kind of establish a minimum wage criteria. Then 43A talks about the participation of workers in the industries. And the Article 42 also provides for maternity relief to women. All these are the constitutional provisions. Now let us talk about the key jurisprudence which has been there in this sector. First is the Bangalore Water Supply and the Sewerage Board versus R. Rajappa, the case of 1978 that has been considered. The broad interpretation of industry that was given, the triple test that we discussed, and the profit motive not being essential in order to be declared an industry. Then came the state of UP versus Rajbir Singh, the kind of judgment which has been the talk in today's newspaper. So what has this essentially done? That we have retained the relevance of the framework that was set up in 1978, but we've tried to make it more refined and interpret the IRC of 2020 independently. So what has the court essentially stated? It has said that for the cases which have been pending under the IDA, which was earlier existing, that the same provision of this triple test, it will continue to apply. But IRC or the Industrial Relations Code of 2020 will apply to the newer cases. Then came the Ranveer Singh versus Union of India 1982. So there is no sequence to it, but whenever a question comes, because we've seen questions coming in the mains examination specifically asking you regarding judgments related to some specific sector. That is why this is the list of judgments that you can be using in that kind of question, and also it can provide you fodder material for some other question. This judgment in the Ranveer Singh case, it recognized equal pay for equal work. So it recognized that there is this idea of dignity, it is not only related to providing you employment, that you are getting a wage for your employment. Rather, everybody has the right to equal pay if they are doing equal amount of work. The People's Union for Democratic Rights versus Union of India case of 1982, so it stated that if a person is working under a minimum wage declared by the state, then that will be declared as a forced labor. So force does not necessarily have to be physical force, it can also be economic force in that sense. Then came the Consumer Education and Research Center versus Union of India case. So it kind of extended the workers' rights, that they don't only have the right to an employment, right to the wage, but they also have right to healthy working environment. Because if the health of the workers will be ensured, that the efficiency and everything else, that will also follow. Then this case on Municipal Corporation of Delhi versus female workers, this essentially expanded the benefits, the maternity benefits, to casual women workers. So it stated that not only the people who are employed in the formal sector or the women who are employed in formal sector, they only are not eligible for the maternity benefits. Rather, it should be extended to casual laborers who are maybe on a muster roll. Then came the Bandhua Mukti Morcha versus Union of India case. What it essentially did was, it expanded the scope of Article 21 to bring within it the idea of dignity and the avoidance of bonded labor. Now, what are the key challenges? So we've discussed the existence of certain laws that is there. We have also discussed what kind of jurisprudence has been there in this regard. But is this again free of challenges? The answer is no. There is high amount of informality. So more than 90% of our workforce is right now engaged in informal sector. Therein, they are facing irregular incomes. There is lack of social security that is accessible to these people. Then comes the issue of job quality. It does not matter if a person is only employed. It also matters what kind of employment is he engaged in. Is he getting the employment for which he is capable? His education could be more, the kind of employment that he is getting, it could not be at par with that. Therefore, after we have ensured, we also need to see whether the kind of employment we are providing, what is the quality. For instance, there can be low wages, there can be poor working conditions, there can also be, say, the issue of contract enforcement, job insecurity, underemployment, or the distressed self-employment. A person could be capable of working more, but he is getting employment for a lesser duration or for a job which is of lower quality than his expectations and than his qualifications. Then comes the issue of skill mismatch and low employability. Why so? Because many of the graduates that we are producing, they do not have the required skills, or we can say the industry demanded skills, they are lacking, and thereby the employability factor is in itself very low. So education is not aligned, there is gap amongst the youth, and they need to be reskilled, and there has to be lifelong learning in order to ensure whatever the demands of industry are, they are able to meet those demands. Then is another issue of low female labor force participation rate. So this not only exists because of reasons that there is lack of qualification or things like that, rather we will be taking up this particular topic in detail separately, this issue of low LFPR when it comes to women. Then comes the rise of non-standard employment. So earlier, also when we were discussing this issue of definition of industry, you must recall right now that whenever we are trying to define this, we are essentially defining it more for the kind of employments that were earlier existing, the formal or the structured employment, wherein there would be a workplace, there would be an employer, there would be an employee, there would be a contract. But those things are not existing today for the jobs which are evolving in the economy that we have right now. For example, the gig workers, the platform workers, the casual workers, people who are on a contract, whose contract is renewable, sometimes they are fixed term, sometimes they are flexible. Now all of this is not covered. Then there is also ambiguity in the relationship that is there between the employer and the employee. Also, there is a need for enhancing our social protection to these people. Then comes the issue of social security gaps. So say a person is involved in the informal sector, does he have the protection against old age, against any kind of accident, any illness that might fall upon him or his family? How is he going to manage this? So essentially the social security aspect is largely missing when it comes to the informal sector. Then the enforcement challenges. So we have the regulations in place, we have the laws in place, but how is the implementation on ground? That is very weak, especially for the MSME sector, because the MSME sector, they have low operational resources, they have low administrative resources, and their financial resources are also not up to the mark. Therefore, there is also more simplification that is required when it comes to implementation of these laws. Then sometimes the compliance itself is very complex. Multiple overlapping laws that we essentially dealt with when it comes to implementation of the 4 codes that we will discuss in the subsequent slide. Then is the coming up of AI and automation. For sure, it is making the lives of people easier. For sure, it is going to increase the productivity of some sectors. But then it is also going to replace the people who are engaged in routine activities or certain kind of jobs. Those jobs are more often than not, they are entry-level jobs. That is why this again, we need to ensure that there is sufficient amount of reskilling of people for the jobs which are now going to be created as a result of coming of the automation and AI. Next is the migration and the portability issue. So for example, a person was working in a factory in Haryana. Now person has decided to migrate to Maharashtra, and now he is no longer going to work in a factory, rather he is going to be any kind of platform worker now. So the earlier benefits that he had earned while being in the factory, those benefits or those social security provisions, they should also continue now when he will be working as a platform worker. This kind of portability is what is missing. So large scale internal migration is happening within the nation, we all know. So certain states, they are they're suppliers of the migrant workers, and certain states, they are absorbers. But where is the transition? How are we going to kind of ensure that a seamless transition happens, and in that process the person does not lose out upon his benefits? Now specifically taking up the women aspect and the labor welfare. So the female LFPR, we all know it is very low, somewhere around 40%. There is also wage inequality. So one thing is regarding the skilling aspect, that is definitely there, but there are also certain other factors which force women to sometimes leave the workforce. So what are those factors? One is the inequality in the wages. There is another aspect that we call as the glass ceiling effect. Beyond a certain position, women are not allowed to grow. Then there is also occupational segregation. So women are always expected to perform certain kind of jobs. For example, the job of a teacher or a doctor, for instance, or a nurse. So there are certain professions which are considered to be more women friendly. Then the same women, they are also going to face security issues. That is also going to be a deterrent when it comes to participation of women in workforce. There is also lack of childcare facilities that we are right now extending, for example, the creche facilities. Then there is also another issue that comes up, which is regarding the unpaid work that women are right now so much engaged in. The workplace safety aspect, the maternity protection aspect. For example, a woman, she exits out of workforce because of maternity, then the re-entry has to be made more smooth. The care economy, which women are right now engaged in, which is essentially free. Then coming to the child care facilities, which we just now discussed, the safe employment will ensure that there is higher participation. Therefore, we need to create an enabling environment wherein women can enter the workforce and sustain there. Next comes the welfare and the productivity aspect of the labor, or essentially discussing the health aspect of labor. So these two are the diversions that we are right now taking from the main topic as such, because these are themes which are more focused upon by UPSC repetitively in the mains examination. So one thing that we need to understand is that a healthy workforce is also going to be very productive for the economy. So when we are talking about efficiency, we also have to talk about the welfare aspect. So whenever say a worker is healthy, he is going to stay there or learn even more skills. When it comes to improvisation or reskilling, he is going to actively participate. The absenteeism is going to be low when the working atmosphere is fine. When the worker is healthy, then the motivation is also high. If we are ensuring that there is social security that is extended to the worker, if he knows that his job is more secure, in that case, his motivation is going to be high, his kind of involvement in his workplace is going to be more. Then the wages and the productivity, they are, as we discussed, leading to each other positively. Then the labor welfare as a productive investment. So not just the government, but also the industries, they need to incorporate this more as a productivity or an efficiency related aspect. Now, what are the steps which have been taken, or what are the legislations which have been brought in? So earlier there were 29 labor codes which were being implemented by the central government. They were essentially replaced by 4 labor codes, leading to simplification and rationalization. First was the Code on Social Security. Essentially, it tries to broaden the social security architecture to bring within its provisions the gig workers and the platform workers. Then next comes the next Code on Wages, which is to ensure that there is provision of minimum wage to every worker. Then the timely payments have to be ensured. Then we also have to ensure equal remuneration for equal work that we discussed. Then came the Industrial Relations Code. So this essentially is dealing with the trade unions, the worker unions, the kind of disputes that can exist within the industrial area. So essentially the standing orders, retrenchment, the closure, all of these issues, they are dealt with under this code. Next is the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code of 2020. This essentially tries to ensure that there is healthy environment, there is safety and security of the workers that is ensured. And there are also other major schemes. For example, the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana, the eShram portal, the Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, Skill India, National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme. The reason these schemes have been listed here is because whenever you are answering any question, you have to keep in consideration the other legislation aspects which have been brought in recent years. If you try to enlist this is not just going to increase the number of points, but also it will show that you are thinking upon the same issue from a multidimensional perspective. Now, what are the implementation challenges? First is the center-state coordination, which is required upon the issue of labor. Next is the enforcement capacity, which many MSMEs lack. Then the compliance of MSMEs, which needs to be increased. The worker awareness or access, many times they are themselves not aware of what kind of benefits, especially the people who are engaged in the informal sector. They are very less aware about their own entitlements to various benefits. Then comes the regulatory transition. So when we are transitioning from the earlier codes to the new codes which have right now been brought in, this transition has to be ensured that it is very smooth. Then the law and implementation gap challenges. Already so many laws are existing. We don't need to bring in more laws, but rather we need to ensure that the implementation becomes better. What is going to be the way forward? First, that any kind of protection has to be worker-centric. Then the term you can directly use in the mains examination, flexicurity, which essentially is trying to combine two terms. That first, we need to ensure that all the provisions related to employment, they are more or less flexible, because we see our workforce is regularly now transitioning from informal to formal, then again to formal, in between the casual labor to say any kind of platform work or to a gig worker. Now all of this transitioning is happening, therefore the flexibility has to be there, but along with that we also need to ensure that there is security of employment. Then the universal social protection which we are aspiring to provide. Coming to the collective bargaining, which the workers, that has to be strengthened. The labor formalization, we just now discussed regarding the informalization of Indian economy that is happening. Then the industry linked skilling, that is something we are lacking upon. Then industry related kind of training programs which we need to bring in. Skilling and the apprenticeship programs, that also need to be brought in. Women friendly workplaces, the AI era reskilling, keeping in mind the upcoming technologies, the changes in the economy that are going to be taking place, we need to bring in sufficient amount of reskilling within the workforce. Then the labor administration, that has to be effective. This is the next mains question you can practice related to this topic. The next topic we are going to take up today is related to the mains value addition, wherein we are talking about the youth unemployment. So there have been two articles that have come up. One upon the impact of the youth unemployment upon the household as such. So when we are discussing about unemployment, this is not an individual related issue. This article essentially told us that when, say, an individual is unemployed, then it is going to have a cost upon the entire household. So it is going to increase the burden upon the earning member. It is also going to reduce the household consumption and the household savings, because the person who was expected to be earning by now, he is not earning, and also spending from the collective funds that the household have. Then the second article was talking about something new, that this NEET term, he is referring to the youth which are not in employment, neither they are in education and nor in training. So he is basically trying to argue that when we are discussing unemployment as an issue, we not only need to look at employment, rather we should be increasing our purview to also think about people who are not in employment, they are not in education, they are not taking any kind of training. So there have been certain graphs, ready to use graphs for the mains examination. The unemployment which is rising with the educational attainment. So we are seeing that the unemployment amongst the graduates, it has increased from 35 to 39%, and when we are looking at a different age group, it has rather increased from 12% to 20%. Now we also need to look at certain numbers. You don't need to memorize the entire table, rather you can pick and choose amongst the data and then use it selectively according to the question that has been asked. So the first data that has been given is that amongst the 15 to 29 years olds, the unemployment is 14%. When we are looking at the lower age group of 19 to 28 years old, it is even higher at 29%. So tertiary educated youth who are right now NEET, which we just discussed, the percentage is 40%. Now we also need to understand that this is not a short-term unemployment that these people are facing, rather it is long-term or structural unemployment, because we see that 58% unemployed youth, they are searching for work for more than 1 year. 10% are searching for more than 2 years. Then comes the household consumption, where any educated unemployed youth is there. So we see that for a similarly placed family which is not having unemployed youth, their consumption on an average is higher by 1000 rupees per month. Next is this 1.5 versus 2, average earning members in household with versus without unemployed educated youth. So for a family which is having an unemployed youth, the average earning members are 1.5 and it is 2 for the other category of families. Then the households with unemployed educated youth having no active earner. So there are also families wherein not just the youth in consideration is unemployed, rather there is not a single person who is earning in the family. The percentage is this. Then families wherein they are dependent upon a single earner is 39.5%, which is essentially highlighting that the family is not ready to bear any kind of disturbance that can happen, any kind of insecurity which the family might face because of that person not being able to participate in his work for certain amount of time. Then the entire family's security will be in question. Next, coming to households where no earning member has a regular salaried job, it is 62%, which means that high amount of informalization again in such families. Then this UER limitation, which essentially excludes discouraged workers outside the labor force. So we should try to understand this phenomena wherein we are having a large population which is right now in the workforce age section. For example, we can see the data here. So the size of workforce of India right now, it is 16 millions. Essentially, this is the demographic transition we are having. Now, to make it into a demographic advantage, we need to put in place certain employment provisions. Otherwise, this is going to be a demographic disaster as such, and no kind of advantage we are going to get out of it. Certain paradox you are also seeing, that the educational attainments, they are increasing and still the unemployment is also increasing. Some things you must have observed in the data. For example, in this slide you've seen that amongst the youth who are just entering the labor force, the unemployment rate is even higher, which means that the transition from school to workforce or college to workforce, that is something, that link is missing. Another thing we need to see is the gender dimension, which we also discussed while discussing the previous topic. Then coming to the emerging challenges related to AI and tech. Another graph you are seeing here is related to the women workforce participation. So we are seeing that the self-employment for women is increasing and not the other categories of employment. Let us discuss the next topic for our prelims pointer. So essentially what is happening is MP government, it is trying to right now conduct a restoration of various Buddhist monuments in the state, and as a result fresh excavations have started at this particular site, which is named as Vaishya Tekri. So the location you can see is here in Ujjain on the banks of river Shipra in the state of MP. The ancient name was Ujjaini and the kingdom, ancient kingdom, was Avanti, whose capital was at Ujjain. River Sipra, which is a tributary of Chambal. Now, one thing we need to see is that this is particularly related to, Ujjain is particularly related to Ashokan empire, but it was before he became an emperor. He was essentially associated with the viceroyalty or the governorship of this particular area. This again, you need to know that there was earlier also excavations conducted in the year 1938 to 39, in which we had found large bricks and punch marked coins. Now the presence of these, essentially there has to be more research right now in order to establish the linkages. Another thing you need to know is that the estimated height is around 100 feet. The base diameter is 350 feet. Now you also need to see the comparison with the great stupa at Sanchi. So the recorded height is nearly double. The diameter or the base, it is also more than double. The location is in Ujjain, and the rest you can see the details. They are not so important, but essentially you need to know that it is even larger than the Sanchi stup. The dimensions we've discussed. Now there is also another mound in the vicinity, which is a smaller mound, the Kumbhar or the Kumhar Tekri. You need to just know the terms in case they appear in your prelims examination. The Sanchi distinction also, we must remember that Sanchi, it is protected under the UNESCO WHS World Heritage Site list. That is not been extended right now to this particular site. Coming to the next prelims pointer we have, which is related to the NCDC Amendment Act. So what has happened is this particular organization, which is Samyukt Kisan Morcha, it has criticized the National Cooperative Development Corporation Amendment Act of 2026. So what is the recent contention around? That there have been changes which have been brought into this NCDC. Essentially, it was existing under this Act of 1962, formed in 1963 under the Ministry of Cooperation, and it is statutory since it has been formed under the provisions of an act. Now you must remember that what essentially have been the changes that have been brought in. One thing that I would like to tell you prior to beginning this topic is that the cooperative sector as such, whenever it is limited to one particular state, it would fall under the state list. When it relates to multi-state cooperatives, then the union government will be managing that. This is important because now you must see the kind of criticism this act is facing, because this organization, they are stating that the changes which have been brought in by the central government, they are essentially in contradiction with the Supreme Court judgment that was earlier given, wherein Supreme Court had stated that when it comes to cooperatives, the union government participation or involvement via the NCDC, it is going to be very limited. So what are the changes? Earlier, we see that the aid or the financial assistance that was given was largely limited to agri-based industries, rural industries and rural infrastructure. Now it can go beyond the rural areas and to the non-agricultural sectors also. You must also understand the rationale of the government while bringing in this change. Earlier, what used to happen was the cooperative sector essentially was confined to rural industries, either related to the agriculture or to the dairy sector as such. But in recent years, we have seen a transition in the economy, wherein we are now seeing within the cooperative sector the coming up of food processing, the issue of supply chain, then the coming up of processing facilities, marketing facilities, packaging facilities. All of that is coming up, which is also involving larger industries. That is why this provision was largely restricting the central government in extending the financial aid to certain other players which might be playing a role in this. So what would happen that the terminology you see also has been changed from the cooperative societies to the cooperative development. Let us take an example. Say any industry, food processing industry is functioning. Now there is a processing unit, but it is not a cooperative. So the government would not be able to extend its support to that particular unit. Is this unit not cooperating or giving its contribution to the development of cooperative sector as such? It is providing. So why not extend the benefits? This was the rationale. Now under this we've seen that the cooperatives essentially had to be based only in rural areas. There is no such restriction under the change. The central intervention was limited, but now we have expanded the central powers to intervene directly. And no power to take the shares of any cooperative society were given to the central government. Now the central government has the power. That is why this kind of criticism is evolving around this issue, because essentially on a subject which is a state subject, how is central government expanding its own participation and involvement is what has been highlighted. Now let us look at the definition of foodstuffs, which now has been expanded to include other edible products and notified food items also. The industrial goods, the geographical restriction requiring eligible activities to be located in rural areas has been removed. The crafts will now include handicrafts and other crafts. Earlier it was only limited to rural crafts. Credit information, NCDC has now been empowered to collect and furnish any kind of credit information or other information to specified authorities and financial institutions. One thing that needs to be seen is that the state level cooperatives fall under state list. NCDC is a central statutory corporation, and that is why its involvement has been questioned. What are the constitutional provisions for this particular industry or cooperative sector? First, under the Article 19, which provides the right to establish cooperative societies. Next, Article 43B, providing the support to the cooperative societies by the government, and Part 9B, which relates to the cooperative societies in entirety. Let us discuss the next topic for prelims perspective. This is related to UPI, which has turned a decade old, which means it's been 10 years since the UPI has come up. So it has been developed by NPCI. Regulatory oversight is being provided by RBI. It is an immediate payment service infrastructure wherein the payments that are happening are instant. They are interoperable. So what is the philosophy behind this? So the basic rationale is that it is providing a common interface wherein it doesn't matter which bank account one has their account in. It also does not matter what is the particular app anyone is using. The payments are going to be seamless. Another thing is that it is bank account to bank account fund transfer that is happening. Person to person transactions and person to merchant transactions. These are the two categories. Now this UPI ID, what is essentially this? You can take it, for example, like an email ID. So now you don't need to know the exact account number. That you need not share. You can simply share the UPI ID. The IFSC code and the other details, they now no longer are required. Coming to the authentication, there is two-factor authentication. A single UPI application, you can link multiple bank accounts to that. There are both the payment mechanisms are allowed, wherein one is making a payment or somebody is asking for a payment, that is also allowed. Interoperability we have just now discussed. Now what is the increase in the volume? So in this financial year of 25-26, the daily average has been 66 crore transactions. Global position, so our government is stating that 49% of the global real-time payment transaction volume, that is right now being captured by UPI alone, which is functioning in 11 countries, including countries like France, UAE, Singapore, or even our neighboring countries like Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. Coming to the next topic, which is related to the weakening of ISRO. Now this has been a criticism which is being made by the opposition. What is the rationale behind that? That there is a new spaceport which is being developed in Tamil Nadu. Upon this spaceport, already ISRO has invested around 1000 crores, and now there is a proposal to transfer this to the private sector. So this increasing amount of privatization that is being criticized, what is the rationale of the government behind doing so? So this is basically being brought in for the small launch vehicle sector. So the government is stating that we are not diminishing the powers or the involvement of ISRO, rather we are channelizing ISRO into performing the more specialized tasks to focus on more larger missions which we are planning. Those missions also we will be discussing. In this light, let us look at the journey of ISRO. Essentially, we can see that the first satellite Aryabhat was launched in 1975, 1980. The coming up of first satellite launch Rohini, which was put in orbit. Chandrayaan-1, first lunar mission of India, which confirmed the presence of water molecules on the surface of Moon. The Mangalyaan mission, then the Chandrayaan-2, which was essentially targeted for a soft landing, which was ultimately accomplished by the Chandrayaan-3, which landed on the south pole of the Moon. Then the Vikram-1, this is the recent achievement wherein first private rocket has been put into orbit. What is the institutional infrastructure we have in place? ISRO, which is responsible for space R&D missions, tech development. This we already know about, functioning under the Department of Space. These two organizations you need to specially put your focus upon. The IN-SPACE, which is going to provide authorization to the non-government space entities. The NSIL, this is specifically to promote commercialization of space technologies and services. Now, there is already in place this Indian Space Policy of 2023, which provides for this entire framework wherein non-government entities, private sector and the government setup, it is all collaborating. The development has been that there are 440 plus space startups. This is one achievement of ISRO. So essentially it is not the reduction of powers, rather we can see it as the enhancement of the achievements of ISRO, wherein now it is empowering even the other players to participate in the space sector. This becomes even more important when we are targeting 50 launches per year. To achieve this target, we require greater private sector manufacturing and launch capacity. What are the major missions and programs? The Gaganyaan mission. This is basically related to India's human space flight program. The objective is to develop indigenous human space flight capability to the low Earth orbit. The Bharatiya Antariksh Station, first module we are targeting by 2028 and its full operationalization we are targeting by the year 2035. Similarly, we are targeting Indian moon landing, placing the Indian astronauts on the surface of the moon, that we are targeting by 2040 under the space vision of 2047. Chandrayaan-3, under which we became the first country to make a soft landing near the south pole of the moon. Chandrayaan-4, under which we are targeting to bring back some samples from the moon, and other future planetary missions like the Venus Orbiter mission. Now, the space launch vehicles, PSLV, which has already been existing, the LVM-3 launch vehicle Mark III, and the Vikram-1, which obviously developed by private sector. What are the key targets? First is, you can say, is the development of our indigenous space station, Bharatiya Antariksh Station, by 2035, Indian on the moon by 2040, 50 launches per year, and a target of increasing our space economy to 44 billion by the year 2030. These are our targets. All of this we have discussed in the previous slides. That was all for today's discussion. Thank you so much.